Basic Education Minister Angie Motshekga says Matric pupils who test positive for COVID-19 will be isolated and allowed to write. She says the health department will take over schools with positive learners and monitor the cases. Matric pupils started writing their final exams this morning. Earlier on Morning Live, Motshekga had this to say.
We have communicated with our provinces to say initially our decision, even with at HEDCOM and at CM level, was that we will follow the health protocols to the latter. And the health protocol says as soon as a person tests positive for COVID, health takes over. So if a learner was going to present themselves with an infection, we're not going to touch that learner according to health protocols. But with all the requests and the outcome that came through, health agreed to come to our rescue to say as soon as we identify a person tested positive, they will take over. They will bring people to supervise, to invigilate. We just have to create an isolation room then, so which means they can write. So we've communicated that to our provinces.
SABC reporter Chriselda Lewis is at the Thembisa Secondary School, where at least 431 learners are writing their final exams. Chriselda, you've been covering this story since the morning. Please just give us a wrap-up of what has been happening so far.
Well, Desiree, you'd recall we've been crossing live from inside the examination centres since this morning. We now have left those examination centres. The first paper officially got underway at 9 o'clock this morning, just as you were starting your show. So indeed, here at the Thembisa Secondary School, this is one of the biggest exam centres here in Ekurhuleni. As you pointed out, 431 matric learners will be writing their exams. This number is excluding the number of adult education and training learners who will also write here. So 10 classrooms are basically going to be used for these learners to write their papers. In the bigger classrooms, you'll have about 42 learners that will sit in that classroom and write their first paper. And in the smaller ones, you'll have about 16 to 18 of those learners. So going into, these classrooms, you would see that it's very difficult or different circumstances that these learners get to write these exams. All of them having to adhere to COVID-19 protocols, the wearing of masks, and as you enter the classrooms you would see some of the sanitizing stations that are also there. You would also know that the education sector was one of the hardest hit as a result of the coronavirus. So schooling had been disrupted and online learning and teaching had to take effect. At this particular school, Desiree, just to give you a sense, you had about 10 teachers who were infected with COVID-19 and one general assistant, together with 5 learners, but all of whom have recovered. So COVID-19 really, basically causing havoc within various sectors, including the education sector. So these learners have really had to prepare for this examination under very difficult and different circumstances. So I guess we'll have to wait and see how the class of 2020, the matric class of 2020, does perform. But here at this particular school, 25 invigilators to oversee the exam here. And basically at about 8 o'clock this morning, Desiree, the administrative work had begun. That was where a lot of, the marking of the attendance register had been taking place to ensure that once the learners sit, they will be able to begin writing their English paper.
Did you get a sense that it's even more important this time around for learners to come through early because there are just added processes before they get into the classroom?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely, Desiree. I mean, we arrived here very early this morning, just after 6 o'clock, and already some of the invigilators had already arrived. So obviously they would need to arrive before the learners to make sure that everything is in place, all the classrooms are open, and the learners themselves slowly started trickling in after that to ensure that exactly at 9 o'clock they were seated and ready to begin writing their first paper in this 2020 matric examination. So very different, Desiree, absolutely, where a lot more time needs to be set aside now to ensure that all the administrative processes take place before these learners are able to go into these classrooms and begin writing their paper. And while doing that, the invigilators and the learners themselves, everyone needs to make sure that they're safe while doing that and having to concentrate on what is certainly going to be the most important exam for these young learners who will then exit the education sector, the high school education sector. So absolutely, Desiree, that is what we have seen here at this particular school, and I would really believe that all those measures have been put in place in all countries, in all schools around the country, I beg your pardon.
You probably captured this live in the morning with students, but just to give the viewers of the agenda a sense of how the students felt about the prospects of starting their first paper.
Well, Desiree, I was saying to our sister program Morning Live a bit earlier on, I was a nervous wreck, some 20 years ago when I wrote my Matric exam. These are very brave ones here at this particular school here this morning. They seem very upbeat, despite the challenges that they've had to go through, having to resort to online learning as a result of, COVID-19 and the effects thereof. So certainly I must say to you that they're very upbeat at this particular point. I'm afraid, Desiree, I'm going to have to wrap up this crossing very quickly because I'm standing very close to a class and I really don't want to disturb the Matric learners as they begin writing this first paper. And I must tell you that they're very upbeat. Despite the challenges, they say they will do their best, and they've studied very hard. That's what they say.
Totally understand. Thank you so much, Chriselda, for that update. Let's take a break. You're watching The Agenda.